Okay, so I think it's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, maliki yawmiddin, iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een, ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim, ghayri al-maghdubi alayhim, walad-dallin, sadaqallahu al-aliyyu al-azim. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله ولا أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليكم منا جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقينا وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد منا لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Peace be upon you, O Aba Abdullah, and upon the souls who have gathered in your courtyard. Upon you from us all is the peace of God forever, for as long as we remain and as long as night and day endure. And may God never make this our last pledge to visit you. Peace be upon Al-Husayn and upon Ali, the son of Husayn, and upon the children of Husayn and upon the companions of Husayn. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, 9 nights we've walked. We've recovered the word. Shahada means witness, with the cost of witnessing born in the body. We traced its lineage from Abel through the prophets, Noah, Abraham, John the Baptist, Zechariah, Jesus, peace and blessings be upon them all, through Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and to Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, his family and righteous companions, and to a plain in Iraq. We learnt the theology of Shaykh Mutahari's 5 kinds of death, and the candle of society that has to burn for the room to be illuminated. We heard Imam Husayn's diagnosis at Mina and the 3 silences, fear, comfort, and the narrowing of moral vision. And we received what Dr. Shariati, peace and blessings be upon him, gave us in his sociology, the distinction his Tashayyu' Alawi, his black Shiism and red Shiism pointed towards, which our series has carried forward ever since as the Shahada of the tongue, or the witness of the tongue, and the witness of the life. We stood at the shared ground and the divergences between the Christian witness and our own, and we named the methodology that carried us forward ever since: honor without conflation. The disciples of Jesus, son of Mary, said, and this is from Quran, Surah Al Imran, the chapter of the family of Imran, 3rd chapter of the Quran, verse number 52, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the disciples said, "We are the helpers of God. We have believed in God. Bear witness that we are submitters." The same root that the Quran used for them is the root that holds this whole series together. We left the religious neighborhood and we entered the secular one, Marx, Fanon, and we asked what becomes of sacrifice when the form is preserved and the content is missing. We refused the cheap clipped reading of Marx's famous sentence, and we heard the diagnosis the prophets had already made from inside before Marx had made it from the outside. We then walked the anti-colonial road, Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh, Quan Duc, and in our own hour, Aaron Bushnell. And we asked the question the night turned on: whose worship is your walking for? And in the Maqtal, we walked with Abbas ibn Ali at the Euphrates, and the hands that did not drink. We walked into the most difficult panel, the aesthetic state-manufactured panel, Bushido, the kamikaze cockpit, Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the other side, both empires in August of 1945. And we received the line that became the structural pivot of this entire series. Said Zainab in the court of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad in Kufa, answering the tyrant in a handful of words, "Ma ra'aytu illa jamila." I saw nothing except beauty. And of course the references are all in the write-up. The 72 whose loyalty was to God himself, to the truth God had revealed, and to Imam al-Husayn as the proof of that truth upon the earth. Not to a flag, not to an emperor, not even to a man as such. And last night, the corrective night, the 4 counterfeits: political, ritual, cultural, and for the first time in this series, imperial. and the three tests of true witness. The young Iranian martyr named in honor of Husayn ibn Ali, the first martyr of the Ahl al-Bayt after the passing of the Prophet, and how Haj Qasim Soleimani, may God rest his soul, made him a hujjah on how to live and how to die, and how Imam Khamenei sealed it by saying, Martyr Hujjaji became God's proof before everyone's eyes. 9 nights of building. Tonight is the 10th. We're at the door of the day. In a few hours, when this hour closes and the night turns, the day of Ashura begins. Imam Husayn, at the moment we begin tomorrow's morning, will be standing in his armor leading the morning prayer at Karbala for the very last time. By noon, he will be on the ground. By afternoon, the horses will have crossed his body. Every one of those nights, every taxonomy, every witness, every cross-traditional figure, every quotation we recited together, every tear that we have shed, was preparation for this hour. Not warming us up, preparation in the sense of teaching us how to see what we are about to see. Because the witness at the center of this hour is not a witness who fits into one of the categories we have been building. He is the category itself. He is what every other witness in every tradition, every other tradition, in every other generation is measured against. Every witness before Imam al-Husayn was a preparation. Every witness after him is an echo. He is the measure by which every claim to bearing witness is weighed. That is the taxonomy of tonight. And that is what I would like you, God willing, to take and carry home. Tonight, we walk first to the roots, the prophetic chain, the literal inheritance, the blood of every prophet's witness flowing to the body of Imam al-Husayn. Then to the branches, the synthesis of the 9 nights, each one already inside of him. Then to the climax. Husayn is the Furqan, the criterion of God, the standard by which every empire of every age is weighed. Then to the fruit, receiving the criterion, applying it not only to the empires out there, but to the empire in here. The inner Yazid that the nafs al-ammara, the base animalistic self, whispers to us that we should comfort. And then we pause and we hand off to Safar, pledge the return, and the maqtal opens the door we have been standing at all night. Before we begin, the anchor verse on which tonight is built. From the Quran, Surah Al-Fatih, the chapter of the conquest, the 48th chapter of the Quran, verse number 49. God speaks of his prophet and the community gathered around him. Listen to what he says. Allah says in Quran, and again, all the references are in the write-up. He says, Muhammad is the messenger of God, and those who are with him are firm of heart against those who reject the truth, merciful amongst themselves. You see them bowing and prostrating, seeking the favor of God and his good pleasure. Their mark is on their faces from the traces of prostration. That is their description in the Torah, and their description in the gospel is as a seed which sends forth a blade, then makes it strong. It becomes thick and it stands on its own stem, delighting the sowers, that he may enrage the disbelievers through them. This is the verse that Allama Tabatabai, in may God rest his pure soul, in Al-Mizan, names as the structural pairing of firmness with falsehood and tenderness with the people. The pairing we took home with us last night, the pairing that runs from the Torah to the gospel and to the community of the Prophet. Peace and blessings be upon him. But tonight I want you to hear the second half of this verse, which is their description in the gospel is as a seed which sends forth its blade, then makes it strong, then becomes thick, then stands on its own stem. This is the architecture of every prophetic chain. Every witness is a seed. Every seed sends forth a blade, and every blade strengthens. And eventually, when the chain has done its work, there stands on its own stem a single body that is the seed, the blade, the strength, and the standing crop all at once. That body is our beloved Imam al-Husayn. That body is what we will sit with tonight. And as we open the door, as we recite at the start of every visitation to him, the words the tradition has placed at the threshold of his grave, let us begin with the opening of Ziyarat al-Warith, the Ziyarah of the Heir. The Ziyarah the believers walk to Karbala to recite at his graveyard, and that believers recite every Thursday evening. It says, "Peace be upon you, O heir of Adam, the chosen of God. Peace be upon you, O heir of Noah, the prophet of God. Peace be upon you, O heir of Abraham, the friend of God. Peace be upon you, O heir of Moses, the speaker with God. Peace be upon you, O heir of Jesus, the Spirit of God. Peace be upon you, O heir of Muhammad, the beloved of God." 6 inheritances. This ziyarah is not mere poetry. This ziyarah is doctrine. When the believer walks to Karbala, or on Thursday when he recites the dua, when he stands either physically or metaphorically at the grave of Imam Husayn, and the believer says, "Peace be upon you, heir of Adam. Peace be upon you, heir of Noah. Peace be upon you, heir of Abraham, heir of Moses, heir of Jesus, heir of Muhammad," the body in the grave carries in its blood the inheritance of every prophet of God who came before. Not just symbolically, literally. In the Shi'i theology of Imamah, the prophetic light passes through every prophet and lands finally in the bodies of Ahlul Bayt. And so the body of Imam al-Husayn at noon on the 10th is not one man on a battlefield. He is the destination of the entire prophetic chain. That is where we begin. Please give me a salawat and we move on to the first of the points, which is the blood that flows to Karbala.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Now the first thing the ziyarah does is name the inheritance. 6 names, 6 prophets, 6 lines of witness, each one ending on its own, but each one handing forward that which it carried. Let us walk through them together this evening, one by one, slowly and meticulously. First, the first inheritance is Assalamu alayka ya waritha Adama sifwatillah. Peace be upon you, O heir of Adam. And I will say these lines in Arabic so that people become familiar with the Arabic terminology. Peace be upon you, O heir of Adam, the chosen one of God. What is Adam's witness? It is the witness of return, of the first soul that after the tarka awla, after abandoning of the better that we discussed previously, when Adam took from the tree he had been counseled not to take from, turned back to God. Adam's witness is the witness that the cycle begins again, that the return is always open, that the door to repentance, a tawwab, one of God's names, is the door God himself never closes. But before Adam's witness was even completed in his own life, the cycle had been enacted by his sons. And that is where this series began on the very first night. Abel, Habil, the first man whose blood the earth received, because he offered to God what God accepted, while his brother offered what God refused. The first qurban the earth ever received from human hands. Hear the verses again, the verses we read together on the first night from Surah Al-Ma'idah, the chapter of the table spread, 5th chapter of the Quran, verse number 27, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Recite to them the story of the 2 sons of Adam in truth, when each of them offered a sacrifice, and it was, or qurban, and it was accepted from one of them and was not accepted from the other." And then Abel's 2 sentences, the first act of witness in the history of earth. Again, Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter of the table spread, 5th chapter of the Quran, this time verse 28, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, "If you stretch out your hand to kill me, I will not stretch out my hand to kill you. I fear God, the Lord of all creation." 2 sentences, a refusal and the reason for the refusal. On the first night, we returned to these words and we read them with Allama Tabatabai in Al-Mizan, who showed us that Abel is not the language of a frightened man hoping to avoid a fight. Abel is the language of witness. He had knowledge. And we learnt that in Quran, Surah Fatir, the chapter of the originator, 35th chapter of the Quran, verse 28, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, only those endowed with knowledge truly fear God amongst his servants. Abel feared God. Therefore, Abel had knowledge. Therefore, Abel was not a victim. He was a witness in full station. And the same words the Quran used there, Qurban, is the word Sayyid Zainab will use at noon on the 10th, when she stands at the place of the body and the surface of the field is what it is. And what she names beneath the surface is Qurban, received by God. Hear what kind of inheritance this is. What Adam said with his soul, the yes he said in Surah Al-A'raf, when God asked, am I not your Lord? And the sword answered, Bala shahidna, yes, we bear witness. Abel said with his body. And Imam al-Husayn, at the door of the day that we're walking toward, says it with his body at Karbala. The first witness flows forward. The covenant of Surah A'raf becomes the offering of Abel, becomes the standing of Imam al-Husayn in the field. The body of our beloved Imam is, in the language of the Ziyarat, the heir of Adam, the chosen. He carries the first yes. He carries the first Qurban, the first sacrifice. He carries the first witness who changed the heart of his own killer. Because as we read on the first night, the Quran does not stop at just that portion of the story. But rather, Quran continues verses 30 to 31 of the same Surah Al-Ma'idah, the chapter of tablespread, 5th chapter of the Quran, where Allah tells us, then his soul prompted him, meaning Cain's soul, prompted him to kill his brother. So he killed him, and he became of those who are lost. Then God sent a crow scratching at the ground to show him how to cover the body of his brother. He, Cain, said, woe to me! Am I not even able to be like this crow and cover the body of my brother? And he became of those who regret. So he killed him, and he became of those who regret. The first witness in the earth's history changed the heart of his own killer. This is what our beloved Imam al-Husayn carries in his blood from Abel. The witness whose body falls and whose witness continues to work on the world that watched it fall. The series began with the question Abel's blood still asks. Tonight we will ask it again at the close. Where is your brother? The second inheritance is Assalamu alayka ya waritha Nuhin Nabiyillah. Peace be upon you, O heir of Noah, the prophet of God. So what is Noah's witness? It is the witness of patience. The patience to keep on inviting when no one is coming. The patience to keep on building when the mockery does not stop. The patience to stand on the call of God when the call has been refused for centuries. The Quran preserves Noah's voice. He says, and listen carefully, because this sentence will sound exactly like the sentence that Imam al-Husayn will live at Karbala. In Quran, Surah Nuh, the chapter of Noah, 71st chapter of the Quran, verses 5 and 6, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quotes what Prophet Noah said, saying, my Lord, indeed I have called my people night and day, but my call has only increased them in flight. Listen to that voice. This is the voice of every witness who has stood in a square or in a desert or in a court or a marketplace or anywhere and called toward the truth and watched the people walk away from him. This is the voice of Imam al-Husayn on the morning of the 10th when he stood at Karbala and addressed the army that had come specifically not to hear. The chronicles preserve his words to that army. We will hear them in the Maqtal. He stood before them already alone, already abandoned, without any water, with the bodies of his companions falling, and he gave them counsel. He still tried to call them back. That is Noah's patience. That is Noah's witness, inherited and completed in the body of our beloved Imam. The patience to keep witnessing when no one is listening. And then you have the third inheritance, and this is where the language begins to weigh. You have Assalamu alayka ya waritha Ibrahim Khalilullah. Peace be upon you, O heir of Abraham, the friend of God. So what is the friend's witness? It is the witness of offering. The willingness, not under coercion, but in obedience, with full awareness, to give up the dearest thing in the world. The Quran preserves the conversation between Abraham and his son Ishmael. Abraham has seen a dream. In the dream, God has shown him that he must offer his son. And Abraham, not in private, not with a hidden plan, but openly, turns to his son and tells him, and this is documented in Surah Safat, the chapter of those who ranged in the ranks, 37th chapter of the Quran, verse 102, where Allah tells us, and when the son reached the age of striving with him, Abraham said, O my son, I have seen in a dream that I am sacrificing you. So look, what do you say? And the son said, O my father, do what you have been commanded. You will find me by the will of God amongst the patient. Listen and think about that exchange. The father has been asked to give the son. The son says, do what you have been commanded. This is the moment that broke open every later witness in prophetic tradition. The willingness to give the son in obedience to God. But then the Quran continues, and the verses that follow are the ones that matter for tonight. This is again Surah Safat, the chapter of those ranged in ranks, 37th chapter of the Quran, verses 103 to 107, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so when they had both submitted and Abraham had laid his son down upon his forehead, Allah called to him, O Abraham, you have fulfilled the dream. Therefore do we reward the doers of good. Indeed, this was a clear trial, and we ransomed him with a great sacrifice. And here we must stop and look very carefully. The hand was stayed. The angel called from the heavens. The son was spared. And in his place, وَفَدَيْنَاهُ بِذِبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ. We ransomed him with a great sacrifice. So what was that great sacrifice? For centuries, the commentators have asked. Some say a ram, some say a ram from paradise. But the deeper reading, the reading our scholars have taught for 14 centuries, is that the Dhibh Azim, the great sacrifice, promised at the end of the Ishmael narrative, was not closed in Abraham's lifetime. It was a promise that would be kept later. The son of Abraham was spared because the son of another would be, when the time came, given. The grandson of the Prophet Muhammad at noon on the 10th would fulfill what Abraham had begun. Now hear me very carefully. Ishmael and Imam al-Husayn are not the same act. Rather, they are the same architecture, fulfilled across centuries. For Abraham, the angel stayed the hand. And for our Imam, the angel does not come, not in the same way. The companions fall, Ali al-Akbar, Qasim, Aoun and Muhammad, al-Abbas, the suckling infant, Abdullah al-Radhi, Ali al-Asghar in the father's arms. Every son and every nephew and every cousin and every companion fall. The hand is not stayed. The ransom does not arrive. There is no ram from paradise. But the ransom from paradise that arrived for Ismail is the one being offered finally at Karbala. That is the inheritance of the friend. Abraham's witness was the willingness. Our beloved Imam al-Husayn is the doing. Abraham's act was the preparation. Imam Husayn's the fulfillment. The promise the angel made to Abraham, we have ransomed him with a great sacrifice, was read forward in time. The great sacrifice was Imam al-Husayn. The son of Abraham was spared because the grandson of Prophet Muhammad would not be. This is the doctrine of the heir of Abraham, the friend of God. Let us now move on to the fourth inheritance. Assalamu alayka ya waritha Musa kalimillah. Peace be upon you, O heir of Moses, the one who spoke with God. So what is Moses' witness? It is the witness of refusal. The staff against Pharaoh, the refusal to bow to any throne that is not God's throne. The Quran preserves the command. God speaks to Moses and he says, and this is from Surah Nazi'at, the chapter of those who drag forth, 79th chapter of the Quran, verse number 17, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Moses, go to Pharaoh, for indeed he has transgressed beyond the bounds. Two words in Arabic that mean, indeed he has transgressed the bounds. This is the foundational refusal. The refusal to acknowledge as God what is not God. The refusal to call legitimate that which is not legitimate. The refusal to bow, to bend the knee. And what is the sentence Moses' inheritance lives in the mouth of Imam al-Husayn? It is the sentence we have already heard on the first night, on the third night, on the seventh night, and on the ninth night of this series. The sentence that Imam said in Medina when Walid ibn Utbah called him and demanded allegiance to Yazid, where Imam al-Husayn said, Mithli la yubayi'u mithlah. Someone like me does not give allegiance to someone like him. And the reference, of course, is all in the write-up. This sentence is the staff against Pharaoh, said in Arabic. This sentence is the refusal Moses learned at the burning bush, said in the mouth of our beloved Imam. This sentence is what every witness in every age, from the first man Pharaoh ever asked to bow, has been carrying in some form or another, in some tongue or another, in some hour or another. It is what Polycarp said at Smyrna. It is what Yarostarga said at Brandenburg prison. It is what Aaron Bushnell shouted in front of the Zionist embassy. It is what Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, said in Tehran on the 17th of February 2026, a mere 11 days before they murdered him. Someone like me does not give allegiance to someone like him. The chain of refusal. Moses inherits it. Imam al-Husayn completes it. And hear me, because we will return to this at the very close of this evening. Every one of us in the chamber of our own hearts, every day, is being asked to live in some small fragment this same sentence. But we will come back to that. Before we move on to the era of Jesus, the Spirit, I'd like a very loud salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So the fifth inheritance, and here we must walk with the most care, because the witness of Jesus has been the most contested, the most layered, and the most claimed and counterclaimed of any prophetic life within the chain. We walk with the methodology that we set out on the fifth night of our series, honor without conflation. The line from Ziyarat Waritha is, Assalamu alayka ya Waritha Isa Ruhullah. Peace be upon you, O heir of Jesus, the Spirit of God. So what is the witness of Jesus? It is in fact twofold. The first half is what the Christian tradition has memorialized and what we honored already on the fifth night. The life laid down for the people, the body offered up so that the truth carried would not be lost. But there is a second half, often less attended to in the popular telling, and one we must lift back into view tonight because it wires directly into the khutbah of Mina our beloved Imam al-Husayn would 6 centuries later deliver to the corrupted scholars of his own community. Jesus, peace and blessings be upon him, resisted the corrupted clerical and elitist establishment of his time. He resisted it openly, publicly, with words sharp enough to be remembered for 2,000 years, and with actions visible enough to be feared by the men of position. Begin with his mother, Maryam, said Maryam, Saint Mary, who, as we've already heard on the fifth night, a Siddiqah, the truthful one. The Quran names her with one of the highest stations any woman has ever attained, any woman or any man has ever attained. But the Pharisaic establishment that surrounded the birth of Jesus accused her in its councils and in some of its later writings of inchastity, slander deep enough that traces of it have been preserved in some of the later rabbinical and Pharisaic texts for the centuries that followed. The Quran itself names what they did. In Quran, Surah An-Nisa, the chapter of the women, 4th chapter of the Quran, verse 156, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And for their disbelief and for their utterance against Mary of a grievous calumny." Buhtanan azima, a grievous calumny. Calumny. The Quran teaches, or rather reaches for the strongest word in the lexicon of slander. And God's answer was the answer of God. He did not let Mary stand alone in the face of said accusation. He did not let the slander hang in the air. He gave her infant son the power to speak as a child in the cradle. And Quran in Surah Maryam, the chapter of Saint Mary, 19th chapter of the Quran, verse 30, preserves the moment where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, He, Jesus, said, "Indeed, I am the servant of God. He has given me the scripture and made me a prophet." The infant Jesus in his mother's arms speaks to the people who had accused her and insulted her. And his first words to the world are a defense of his mother's honor against the slander of the corrupted establishment. I am the servant of God. He has given me the scripture. He has made me a prophet. The witness of Jesus begins in the Quran before he can walk. And it begins as a refusal of the establishment that has slandered his mother. Years later, when Jesus was a grown man walking the streets of Jerusalem, he came to the temple, the same temple that had been built and rebuilt for the worship of the one God, that the Pharisees and the chief priests had over the generations allowed to become an open market, money changers profiting from the worship of the poor, dove sellers turning the Lord's house into a place of commerce. The Gospel of Matthew preserves what the witness did. And the references for all of these are in the write-up. They're very important and I encourage everyone to study them. The Gospel of Matthew tells us, "And Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out all them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers, and the seats of them that sold doves, and said unto them, It is written, My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." He overthrew the tables. He did not write a tract. He did not sit and lobby the priests. He went into the place of worship and physically, bodily, overturned the architecture of corruption. This is not the witness of the Lamb led silently to the slaughter. It is the witness of the prophet of God who, with his own hands, refused to let the house of God be made into a marketplace. And then he turned to the scholars, the chief priests, the men of position and learning and respect who had presided over the corruption, and he chastised them by name in public, in language that has not been softened in 2,000 years. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 23, preserves what the tradition has called the 7 woes. Here is a selection. Again, I recommend everyone go and study this. This will show you a face of Jesus that unfortunately most people do not know. It reads, and the references are all in the write-up. "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For ye neither go in yourselves, neither suffer ye them that are entering to go in. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayer. Therefore ye shall receive the greater damnation. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones and all of uncleanliness." And then, listen, because this is the verse that lifts the whole of Matthew 23 into the chain we have been walking together for 9 nights. Jesus closes the 7 woes with a sentence that names the architecture. that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, the son of Barachias, whom ye slew between the temple and the altar. The references, again, like I said, are all in the write-up. Hear what Jesus is naming. The blood of righteous Abel, the first witness. We walked on the first night. The blood of Zachariah, we walked on the second. Jesus himself names the chain. Jesus himself places the corrupted clerical establishment of his time in the lineage of those who killed Abel and those who killed Zachariah. Jesus is preaching the same architecture that we have been sitting in throughout these sessions. And this is what we must not miss. This is exactly what Imam al-Husayn will say at Mina 6 centuries later. The khutbah of Mina that we walked on the 4th night was his own woe to the scholars. The same structure of rebuke, the same kind of audience, scholars and religious functionaries who had made their peace with the system, and the same transaction named, the comfortable scholar who knows the truth and remains silent, the man of position who has purchased his safety from the oppressive ruling powers with flattery and compromise. And hear what the Imam himself was doing in the very first words of that sermon. He opened by citing 3 Quranic verses, and the first one he reached for was Surah Al-Ma'idah verse 63. God himself rebuking the Rabbaniyun and the Ahbar, the rabbinical and scholarly authorities of the children of Israel, for failing to forbid the sinful speech and unlawful wealth that they saw in their communities. He did not begin by citing a verse against the Muslims or against the Umayyads or against Muawiyah or against Yazid. He could have said a hadith, he could have said many things. He chose instead the Quran's own verdict against the failed clerical class of an earlier prophetic community. The very demographic Jesus had rebuked at the temple 6 centuries earlier in the 7 woes. This is not us drawing a parallel across the centuries. This is Imam al-Husayn himself drawing that parallel. He was telling the comfortable scholars of Medina and Mecca in the Quran's own words that they were the latter-day Ahbar and Rabbaniyun, the Pharisees and the scribes, repeating the very failure the Quran had already named. Jesus stood at the temple. Imam al-Husayn stood at Mina. The exact same architecture, the same diagnosis, the same divinely inspired chastisement. And the corrupted establishment did what corrupted establishments have always done to the witness who refuses to leave them alone. They conspired to kill him. But they did not do it directly. They were too clever for that, and too cowardly. They knew what would happen if they were seen to kill him openly. The people, the gospel tells us, took him for a prophet. The Pharisees feared the people more than they feared God. Think about these statements in respect to our time. The Pharisees feared the people more than they feared God. So they did what corrupted clerical political establishments have done in every age since. They used the imperial power of their day as an instrument of their conspiracy. The Gospel of Matthew, once more, preserves the planning, and the references are all in the write-up. Then assembled together the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people unto the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and consulted that they might take Jesus by subtlety and kill him. And it continues, and when they had taken him by the kiss of a paid informer in the garden at night, they delivered him to the Roman governor. Then it says, when the morning came, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. Pontius Pilate, the Roman procurator of Judea, the instrument of the empire of Rome, the imperial superpower of that time. And Pilate himself, the gospel preserves, knew exactly what was being done. And again, this is documented in the Gospel of Matthew. For he knew that for envy they had delivered him. For envy. The Pharisaic establishment had not delivered Jesus to Rome because Rome wanted him. Rome did not want him. Pilate, in the Gospel's own account, washed his hands and he said, again, the references are in the write-up, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it. The crucifixion was not Rome's project. It was the corrupted Pharisaic establishment's project, executed through the imperial machinery of Rome. Think about that. Think about that statement, and we'll come to more later. The corrupted clerical political establishment of Jerusalem manipulated the imperial superpower of its time into being the instrument of the killing it could not by itself perform without the people rising against it. That is the architecture. And the Pharisaic establishment did not stop at killing the witness. They demonized him, his mother, his disciples. They wrote their books and recorded their accusations and passed down to their successors a tradition of slander that has, in some quarters, persisted for 2,000 years. The Talmudic and later Pharisaic tradition accounts of Jesus and of Mary include language that we, as Muslims, find unspeakable. The very calumny the Quran had named, buhtanan azima. And the persecution did not stop at the Prophet himself. The early Christian witnesses we honored on the fifth night, Polycarp, Perpetua, Justin, and others, were the inheritors of the same architecture of demonization, now directed at the followers rather than at the Prophet himself. The witness is killed. The mother is slandered. The disciples are persecuted. The pattern is one pattern. The Christian tradition holds that the crucifixion succeeded and that Jesus' witness was completed upon the cross. The Quran does not say this. The Quran says something else. And this is the moment of honor without conflation, where we name where the roads part. In Quran, Surah An-Nisa, the chapter of the women, 4th chapter of the Quran, verses 157 to 158, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, and for their saying, surely we have killed the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, the messenger of God. And they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but it appeared to them so. And most surely those who differ therein are only in doubt about it. They have no knowledge of it, but they follow conjecture. And certainly they did not kill him. Rather, God raised him to himself, and God is mighty and wise. Now hear the verses with the weight that they carry. They did not kill him. They did not crucify him. A likeness was made to them. They have no knowledge of it. They did not kill him for certain. Rather, God raised him to himself. You have 6 denials and an affirmation. The Quran's grammar is precise. The killing did not happen. God preserved his prophet. Allama Tabatabai, may God rest his pure soul, in his commentary on these verses in Al-Mizan, explains the Shi'i position very clearly. Let's listen to his words. Allama writes, and the references again are all in the write-up. He explicitly states that he did not die at their hands, neither by crucifixion nor by any other means. Rather, his matter was made to appear similar to them. So they caught someone other than the Messiah in place of the Messiah and killed him or crucified him. And this is not far from the natural course. For in such mob-like and tumultuous gatherings, the killing may sometimes miss the actual criminal and fall upon someone else. And he was killed by the Roman soldiers who had no complete knowledge of his condition. It was possible for them to take someone else in his place. And along with this, narrations have come down that God the Most High cast his likeness upon another who was taken and killed in his place. References, like I said, are all in the write-up. Now hear what this is and hear what this is not. What it is. The testimony of the Quran, with the precision of one of our greatest commentators of the modern age, that Jesus was not killed, God raised him. The witness was not completed on a cross. The witness was lifted by God's own hand, beyond the reach of the corrupted establishment that thought that it had won. What it is not. A dogmatic position on the exact mechanism. Allama Tabatabai acknowledges several possibilities and does not insist on one. And tonight, neither will we. The doctrinal core is Jesus was not killed, God raised him. Now, Imam al-Husayn is not the Islamic Jesus. The Ziyarat means something more precise. It means that the form of witness Jesus came to embody, the twofold form, the prophetic resistance to the corrupted clerical establishment and the prophetic submission to the will of God in the moment of great cost, was, in the Islamic understanding, fulfilled in its completed form at Karbala, in the body of a man who was indeed killed, because the great sacrifice the angel promised to Abraham in Surah Safat that we covered earlier was the sacrifice that would come not to the son of Abraham, but to the grandson of Prophet Muhammad. In the body of a man whose blood indeed fell on the earth, in the body of a man who first rebuked the scholars in Mina, as Jesus rebuked them at the temple, and then walked into the desert to face the imperial machinery that itself wanted him dead. And here we must say plainly, because honor without conflation requires it of us, that the architecture of our beloved Imam's killing was not identical to Jesus's. The roles are reversed. In Jesus's case, the Pharisaic establishment was the instigator. Rome, through Pilate, was the reluctant instrument. The empire did not want Jesus dead. The corrupted clerical class did. In our Imam's case, the order was reversed. The Umayyad regime, Yazid in his palace in Damascus, was itself the instigator. Ibn Ziyad in Kufa was Yazid's agent the same way Umar ibn Sa'ad was in Karbala. The local hands of the imperial will. There was no Pontius Pilate figure. The empire itself wanted him dead, and the empire itself executed the killing. And the comfortable scholars of Medina and Mecca were not the Caiaphases of this hour, of his hour. They are the latter-day Pharisees in a different sense, not by active conspiracy, but by the failure of silence. They knew the truth and chose to remain silent. The three silences our beloved Imam himself diagnosed at Mina that we studied earlier: fear, comfort, and the narrowing of moral vision. So there is a connection between the two killings, but not a direct analogy. What is the same, and this is what matters, is the person at the center, refusing to bow to a system that has lost its godliness, rebuking the corrupted clerical and political class that should have stood, killed in the end by the machinery of the day. That is the heir of Jesus. That is the heir of every prophet. What differs is the corrupted clerical class's failure mode. In Jesus' hour, active conspiracy. In our beloved Imam's hour, complicit silence. Both fail the same prophetic call, and both stand condemned before God. And the blood, despite the failure of the scholars in both ages, becomes the seed of continued witness. That is what the heir of Jesus means. And now, with the gravity that the criterion of Karbala requires of us, we must name what the architecture looks like in our own age. Please give me a salawat and we'll continue.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى
The Zionist regime is the corrupted clerical political establishment of our time. And the empire of the United States, which unlike Pilate does not wash its hands, is its enthusiastic Rome. The fuller naming, by regime, by lobby, by source, by published record, the Yazid dynasties of our hour that will fall as every architecture of arrogance has fallen, the cross-tradition, truth without chain, that joins what the Quran names about the inevitability of the collapse of falsehood, waits for the Arba'een sessions, God willing. Nights 13 and 14 will sit with all of it in depth. Tonight we hold the architecture. The criterion of Karbala will speak the rest. The architecture has not changed in 2,000 years. The witness who refused it then is preserved by God. And the witness who refused it at Karbala, Imam al-Husayn, is the criterion against whom both then and now are weighed. And we who claim to walk in the inheritance of Jesus and the inheritance of Imam al-Husayn must learn to see the architecture for what it is. Pilate's hands, Caiaphas's plotting, the crowd that was paid to call for Barabbas. The same shape every time, the same machinery in every century. The lesson Jesus' witness leaves us, the inheritance Imam al-Husayn carried forward, is the same lesson he gave at the temple, the same lesson he gave us in the seven woes, the same lesson the Quran preserves at the close of one of its shortest surahs and most concentrated surahs, refocus towards God. In Surah Al-Asr, the chapter of time, a mere 3 verses, let us hear them. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. By the passage of time, indeed, humanity is in a state of loss, except for those who have believed and done righteous deeds and enjoined one another to truth and enjoined one another to patience. Of course, this is Surah Al-Asr, the chapter of time, 103rd chapter of the Quran, verses 1 through 3. Humanity is in a state of loss. That is the diagnosis. The default state of the human being, untethered from God, distracted by Pilate's empire and Caiaphas's scholarship and the money changers in the temple, is loss, except, and the exception is the door. 4 conditions the verse names. Those who have believed, the orientation towards the one God. There is no God except God. The negation of every false sovereign. The affirmation of the one. And done righteous deeds. The body that has become its faith. The life that has become its testimony. And enjoined one another to truth, the mutual call. The community that refuses to let its members drift into the silence the scholars at Mina refuse to break. And enjoined one another to patience. The endurance under the cost of the calling. The same sabr that patience that every prophet has carried. The same patience or sabr Jesus carried in the temple and in the garden. The same sabr or patience Imam al-Husayn carried at Karbala. That is the inheritance from Jesus. That is the way out of loss. That is what he taught with his life and what our beloved Imam al-Husayn completed with his. And the believing, the refocus towards God is always paramount. It's always the first. Because every other empire in every other age is built out of the heart that lost its bearing to the one. Every Pharisaic establishment is built out of scholars who stopped believing in God before they stopped believing in their robes. Every Rome is built out of administrators who stopped believing in justice before they stopped believing in their treaties. The witness restores the bearing. That is the work of Jesus. That is also the work of our beloved Imam al-Husayn. That is the work the criterion places in our hands tonight. And so again we say, Assalamu alayka ya Warith Isa Ruhallah. Peace be upon you, O heir of Jesus, the Spirit of God. What the Christian tradition has gathered around Jesus, the love, the longing, the recognition of the witness who gives up everything for the truth and who refuses to let the corrupt establishment have the last word, Karbala makes literal in the body of our beloved Imam al-Husayn. Not the same act, not the same theology, but again the same architecture. And the architecture that arrived at Karbala in the form God had decreed, it should arrive. This is what honor without conflation asks of us. We name what we share. We name where the roads part. We do not flatten one tradition into another. And we do not deny what is real in another tradition. Polycarp, Perpetua, Justin before Rusticus, and all of those that we have spoken of, every one of these is a witness honored by us, by name, with intellectual seriousness, with the recognition that the Spirit moves where it wills. But what arrived at Karbala in the body of our Imam is the form the prophetic chain was all along aimed at. Imam Husayn is the heir of Jesus. Not the replacement, not the rejection, not the borrowing. the heir. Now we move on to the sixth inheritance, and the chain closes. Assalamu alayka ya waritha Muhammadin Habibillah. Peace be upon you, O heir of Muhammad, the beloved of God. What was the witness of the Prophet Muhammad? The witness of completion. The witness that the chain that began with Adam, that ran through every prophet, has in his body and his message arrived in its final form. And what he hands forward, to whom does he hand it? And here, with the most precision that we have, we must clarify something essential, because the answer is not what the outside reader of Shia Islam often takes it to be. In the Shia theology of Imamah, the Prophet hands forward what God has placed in his keeping, not by inheritance, not by dynasty, not by bloodline, but by nas, explicit divine designation. The Imamah is a covenant. It is not a crown. Someone like me does not give allegiance to someone like him. That line is the refusal of the hereditary monarchy Muawiyah had constructed. It is the refusal of the very kingship by bloodline that the Imamah is not. Now, the full doctrine of Nas, its grounding in Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, second chapter of the Quran, verse 124. Isma, as the hidden inner state only God can identify, we have walked at length in the Lantern of the Past series, specifically in session 24, about the commander of the faithful, Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, under a subsection titled The Essential Qualifications of the Imam. The references are all in the write-up. I encourage everyone to go and review that in order to understand it better. Tonight we hold the essential form. Our beloved Imam al-Husayn carries the Nas into the field of Karbala, not the dynastic claim, not some hereditary throne, but the divine designation transmitted to him by his father from the Prophet at Ghadir. The Umayyads passed a crown to a son. The Prophet passed a divine designation to the soul God had prepared to bear it. These are categorically different things. The body fell at noon on the 10th. The Nas did not. It passed to Imam Sajjad that very afternoon, to the young man chained in the captive's caravan, and from him forward, generation by generation, by the same divine designation, until the chain reaches the hidden Imam of our age. May our souls be his ransom. May God hasten his return. And the Prophet said about Imam al-Husayn, the hadith narrated through, this is a hadith that's well known, it's narrated through both Sunni and Shi'i chains. Husaynu minni wa ana min al-Husayn. Husayn is from me and I am from Husayn. Let's think about for a moment what kind of sentence this is. Husayn is from me. This is what every grandfather might say to his grandson. This is a natural sentence of inheritance. But then you have, and I am from Husayn. This is the impossible sentence. This is the sentence that breaks open the architecture of every other type of inheritance. The Prophet is not saying he descends biologically from his son, from his grandson. He's saying that his prophetic mission, his witness, his work, his very identity as the seal of the prophets is carried forward in the body of his grandson. In such a way, without that grandson's witness, the Prophet's own would be incomplete. This is the sixth inheritance. The Prophet is, in the sense the Shia tradition has held for 14 centuries, completed by what our beloved Imam would complete and would do at Karbala. And so the body that walks into the field at dawn on the 10th carries in its blood, in its bones, in its breath, in its soul, the witness of every prophet of God who came before. 6 inheritances, 1 body, 1 day, 1 field. This is the doctrine of the heir. The blood that flows to Karbala is not a metaphor. It is the literal arrival of the prophetic chain at its destination. This is the doctrine of the roots. And now, having received the roots, we turn to the branches. Please give me a loud salawat and we move on to the branches, the synthesis of the 9 nights.
اللهم صل على محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
فرجا
So across these 9 nights we walked. From Abel and the recovery of the word through the prophetic change, al-Mutahhari's 5 kinds of death, the khutbah of Mina, the Christian witness, the wretched and the witness, the anti-colonial cadence, the aesthetic emptied of truth, and the 4 counterfeits of the false shahada or the false witness. We walked the Hajj Qasim Sulaimani thread from quest to love to Gnostic seeing to shahada, martyrdom, witness at the Baghdad airport. 9 branches, 1 trunk, 1 root, and now the trunk speaks. And here at the synthesis of all 9 nights, the imperial counterfeit thread that began as a seed on the 8th night and was named as the 4th counterfeit last night reaches its theological crescendo. The Furqan in our Quran is the criterion, the discriminator, the standard by which the truth is separated from falsehood. God says in Surah al-Furqan, the chapter of the criterion, the chapter named after this very word, in verse number 1, this is the 25th chapter of the Quran, in verse number 1, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Blessed is he who sent down the criterion upon his servant, that he may be a warner to all the worlds." And again in Surah Anbiya, the chapter of the prophets, 21st chapter of the Quran, verse 48, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says of Moses and Aaron, he says, "And we gave Moses and Aaron the criterion and a light and a reminder for the God-fearing." The Quran is criterion. The Torah, the original Torah, is criterion. And tonight we add a 3rd form to the same word. The criterion is also a person. And that person is Imam al-Husayn. Now hear me carefully, very carefully now. Read with the weight the line carries. Every empire that has ever called its mass killing necessary, justified, beautiful, holy even, is weighed against Imam al-Husayn and found to be wanting. Yazid's empire claimed legitimacy from the Prophet's family while slaughtering the Prophet's family. Caesar's empire claimed Pax Romana while crucifying the Prophets. The British Empire claimed civilization while bleeding India and the world. The American Empire claimed democracy while bombing civilians from Hiroshima to Gaza to Iran. The Zionist regime claims biblical right while invoking Amalek over children and committing unspeakable crimes with absolute impunity. Imam Husayn is the criterion. The cherry blossom on the wing of the kamikaze cockpit, the mushroom cloud over Hiroshima, the bunker buster over Gaza or over a school in Minab, the white phosphorus over a Lebanese village, the drone over Baghdad airport, all of them fall under the same weighing. The criterion does not change. Karbala is the criterion under which every empire has stood and every empire has fallen. Imam Husayn is not one figure in history. He is the permanent measure. And we must say this in the right voice. Tabyeen, not apologetics. We do not soften this to be liked. We do not whisper it because someone might be uncomfortable. We name it because it is true. And we name it in the same breath we name something else. Because the witness against these regimes is the witness for the people. The Western mother who lost her son to the meaningless wars of choice, the Iraqs, the Afghanistans, the Libyas, the Syrias, the Iran, the NATO and the empire have dressed up as necessary, they've all dressed these wars up as necessary, is honored by this criterion. The Jewish family whose conscience refuses what is done in their name is honored by this criterion. The Christian child raised in fear under a regime that has lost its godliness is honored by this criterion. The Palestinian child carried out of Gaza in a body bag is honored by this criterion. The Yemeni child whose food was the food the empire bombed. The Afghan mother whose daughter the empire pretended for 20 years to liberate. The Iraqi grandfather whose city the empire reduced to rubble. The Lebanese family whose home the empire's weapons set on fire. The Iranian father whose country the empire has sanctioned and tried to break for half a century. The African neighbor whose land the empire has destabilized so its resources could be stolen. Every one of them is honored by this criterion. The protesters in London charged as terrorists for standing in direct action against the weapon makers. The journalists silenced for naming what is happening. The citizen of conscience whose speech the empire has criminalized, while those who designed the bombs and signed the checks sit decorated, protected, and applauded by the very system that calls their conscience criminal. It is honored by this criterion. The criterion is for them. The criterion is against the regimes that betray them. And here is the methodological lock we take from tonight forward into the Arba'in sessions and into the rest of our lives, God willing. We do not personalize the regimes to their current leaders. This is extremely important. Netanyahu, Trump, Starmer, Modi, whichever name the news has placed in front of us this morning, they are not the disease, they are mere symptoms. They are what an unchecked self becomes when given an empire. To name the leader as the problem is to suggest the problem would resolve if the leader went. It would not. The system would and has many times installed another who is generally worse. And it is to collapse the structural critique back into personality, which is precisely the opposite of what the criterion does. The criterion weighs the system. And as we will hear momentarily, the criterion also weighs the self that produces both the system and its leader. Never the man at the head alone. This is what our beloved Imam Husayn does at noon on the 10th, when he refuses to give allegiance not just to Yazid, but to the entire architecture of imperial legitimization that Yazid is just the current face of. That is the Furqan. That is the criterion. That is what tonight has been building you to receive. Please give me a salawat and we move on to the criterion weighs the self.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
And now to the heart of tonight. We have built the criterion. Tonight is the climactic clarification of the entire Muharram arc. Imam Husayn is not one historical figure that we remember. He is the permanent criterion against which every subsequent claim to martyrdom, sacrifice and witness is measured. Having walked 9 nights to learn how to weigh, and having received tonight what we weigh against, the criterion is now in our hands. The 3 tests from last night, loyalty to God, consistency with God's law, full consciousness of why are the working tools. Imam Husayn is the standard the tools are calibrated against. We will not call any death Shahada that does not stand the test of our beloved Imam. We will not bless any system that calls itself sacred while doing what the Imam refused to do. But, and here we do something that must be said, we must do something before we close. Because without it, everything we have learnt tonight remains theoretical. The criterion does not weigh only the empires out there. The criterion weighs the empires in here, in our souls, in ourselves. The Quran in Surah Yusuf, in the mouth of the Prophet Joseph, teaches us the very principle. In Quran, Surah Yusuf, the chapter of Prophet Joseph, 12th chapter of the Quran, verse number 53, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quotes Prophet Joseph saying, "Indeed, the soul is ever commanding evil, except for that on which my Lord has mercy. My Lord is forgiving, merciful." This is the verse. The nafs al-ammara, the soul that commands evil. The Prophet Joseph is not confessing his own sin in the verse. He has none. He's teaching us about the soul every human carries. And the exception clause, illa ma rahima rabbi, except for that on which my Lord has mercy, is the door. The mercy of God is what lifts the soul out of its commanded pattern. The jihad against the self is the labor by which we open ourselves to that mercy. So hear me. The criterion weighs the empires out there. Yazid, Caesar, the British, the American, the Zionists. This is the work that we have just done. But the criterion weighs also the inner empires. we carry in ourselves, in every one of us, the inner Yazid. We carry in us an inner Pharaoh, an inner Caesar. The name is different for each age, certainly, but the disease is the same. We carry in us the inner, unchecked self that when given power, even small power, even private power, even the power of a household, even the power of the chamber of our own mind, becomes what we have just spent the last few moments naming in the empires of the world. And the leaders of our age, Trump, Netanyahu, Starmer, Modi, every other name the news asked us to memorize this morning and forget by next week, they are not the disease. They are what an unchecked self becomes when it has been handed an empire. The empire is the unchecked self made structural. If we want to refuse the empires, the work begins in here, in the chamber of our own hearts. Every prayer, every day. And here is the structural seed of this work. Already named in the Maqtal on the first night of our series. Already named in this sermon a few moments ago in the section on Moses. In Medina, on the night Walid bin Utbah called him at midnight and demanded allegiance to Yazid. Our beloved Imam answered with one sentence the chronicles have preserved for 13 and a half centuries. Someone like me does not give allegiance to someone like him. Of course, the references are on the write-up. And Imam Khamenei, Imam Sayyed Ali Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, 11 days before they murdered him in February of this year, 2026, said the same sentence in Tehran. Someone like me does not give allegiance to someone like him. Again, the references are all in the write-up. The chain of refusal across more than 13 and a half centuries. Same sentence, the same architecture, the same God. And so we who claim to be lovers of Imam al-Husayn, we who claim to walk in the chain that includes Imam Khamenei and every other witness whose body has paid the price of refusing to bow or bend the knee, must ensure that someone like us can never give allegiance to our inner Yazid, to our inner Pharaoh, to our inner Caesar, to the base desires that lead us away from God, to the whisperings of Satan who counsels us every second of every hour of every day that the small compromise will not matter, that the small theft is too small to be noticed, that the small lie is too small to repent of. The same refusal we honor outwardly in our beloved Imam must be the refusal we make daily, inwardly, within our very selves. Someone like Husayn cannot give allegiance to someone like Yazid. Someone like Sayyid Ali Khamenei cannot give allegiance to someone like the Americans and the Zionists. And someone like us, we who claim to love these witnesses, we who weep for them every Muharram, who walk to Arba'een, someone like us cannot, must not, will not give allegiance to the inner Yazid the nafs whispers we should comfort. The chain of refusal is the chain of love. To love Imam al-Husayn is to refuse what he refused. And the first place we refuse, the very first place, is the chamber that Imam Ali called the trench of the self. And now I want to put in your hands the weapon, the daily weapon, the one God himself has placed in the prayer of every believer, by which the refusal we have just spoken of is practiced, sustained, and made into the very fabric of who we are. The testimony that we make in every prayer, La ilaha illallah, there is no God except God. Look at the shape of that sentence. It begins with a negation. La ilaha, there is no God. And only then comes the affirmation. Illa Allah, except God. The believer first negates completely, absolutely, without remainder, every false god that might claim a throne in the human heart. And only after the negation is complete does the believer affirm the one God. negation before affirmation, refusal before allegiance, the cleaning of the chamber before the throne is named. And the false gods this testimony negates are not only the carved idols of Quraysh and that the Prophet Muhammad's grandfather refused to bow to in Mecca. They are every false sovereign of the human heart, the inner Yazid, the inner Pharaoh, the inner Caesar. The base desires of the nafs that the Quran in Surah Yusuf told us commands toward evil. The whispers of Satan that counsel the small compromise. The wealth as God of the elites of Kufa, and the comfort as God, the position as God, the safety as God, the career as God, the family as God. When family is loved more than the truth that loves the family. The tribe as God, the flag as God, the leader as God, the system as God. Every one of these is an ilaha, a God, that claims the chamber of the believer's heart for itself. And every time we say, La ilaha illallah, there is no God except God, in the prayer, between 15 and 18 times in each individual obligatory prayer, and more in the optional supererogatory prayers, we are not making a mere polite declaration. We are performing an act of negation and affirmation. We are emptying the chamber. We are refusing every false sovereign and clearing the seat for the one. And here is what that daily repetition does. In Dua Nudba, the supplication of lamentation, which we recite or should do every Friday and every Eid, in longing for the return of the hidden Imam, may our souls be his ransom, may God hasten his return, preserves the sentence the Prophet said to Imam Ali. The sentence describes what faith does in the body of those who carry it fully. The references are in the write-up. Prophet Muhammad said to Imam Ali, and this is also in Dua Nudba, and faith is mingled with your flesh and blood, just as it is mingled with my flesh and blood. Mukhallata, mingled, mixed, blended, inseparable. The Prophet told the commander of the faithful, and through him told us, that the faith of those who carry it fully is not a mere coat they put on. It's not an opinion they hold. It's not a doctrine that they assent to. It has become something in the flesh, in the blood, something the body itself has become. And here is what we must hear tonight. And we must hear it very carefully, because the popular reading misreads the doctrine, and the misreading flattens what the doctrine is actually doing. In the case of the Prophet and the Imams of guidance, this faith mingled with flesh and blood is intrinsic. It is given. It is the doctrine the Hausa tradition has called Isma, what the Quran itself testifies to in the verse of purification, which is Surah Al-Ahzab, the chapter of the Confederates, 33rd chapter of the Quran, verse number 33, where God says, indeed, God desires to repeal all impurity from you, O people of the household, and purify you with a thorough purification. But hear what Isma is and what it is not. Isma, infallibility, is not the suspension of free will, not a metaphysical inability to sin, not a different kind of being incapable of choice. If that were what it meant, the Ma'sumin, the infallible, would deserve no praise for their obedience, and the rest of us no censure for our failure. Isma would collapse the moral economy of the universe. Isma, as the Hausa tradition has carried it from the time of Sheikh al-Mufid, through Allama Hilli, and through, of course, the time of the Imams, through to Allama Tabatabai, and into the teachings of Ayatollah Jawadi Amali today, is known as Lutf, or divine grace. The grace that places into the heart of the Ma'soom, the infallible, such an abundance of the knowledge of God and intensity of love for God that, though they retain the full capacity to sin, the desire to sin has no weight. The fire of their love is so total that the candles the nafs would offer cannot pull them. The fuller exposition, Shaykh al-Saduq's verbatim teachings, that the Ma'soom is capable of sin but does not commit it, Allama Tabataba'i's precise architecture that isma is the perfection of the will through certain knowledge rather than its bypassing, and the pastoral payoff that the ma'sumin, the infallibles, are not a different species of being, but the perfected end of the very road the believer is invited to walk comes, God willing, when we walk together after Arba'een, when the chain of witnesses that runs from Sayyid Zainab forward into the greater occultation. Night 11 will sit with this doctrine in its fullest. Tonight, hold the doctrine in its essential form. The ma'soom, or infallible, is perfectly human. The human as God made the human to be, and is the perfected end of the very road we are invited in our daily refusal to walk. But in our case, in the case of every believer who is not infallible, who carries the inner Yazid, who knows that the nafs, the soul, commands toward evil, this faith mingled with flesh and blood is something we cultivate, something we practice into, something we say into ourselves around 65 times across the 5 daily obligatory prayers, until what began as words on our tongue becomes the substance in our bones. La ilaha illallah, there is no God except God, said once is a declaration. La ilaha illallah, said 65 times a day for 65 years, is a body that has become its testimony. This is Jihad al-Akbar in its daily practical form. How the believer who is not infallible builds slowly the body that can refuse what our beloved Imam al-Husayn refused. How someone like us learns prayer by prayer to say to the inner Yazid the same sentence our Imam said in Medina: someone like me does not give allegiance to someone like him. By the time our test comes, and it will come, perhaps in great ways, but more often in the small daily ways that Imam Ali warns about, the question will not be whether we choose to refuse. The question will be whether the body we have built, prayer by prayer, can do anything else. This is the chain that runs from the morning prayer in Medina through the prayer in the midst of the arrows our beloved Imam al-Husayn would offer at Karbala and Ashura, the prayer that Abdullah ibn Sa'id ibn Abdullah al-Hanafi shielded with his body, the prayer that ended in the last sajda, through every dua nudba we have wept on in a Friday morning, longing and desiring and begging for the Imam of our age, to the prayer we will make tonight after this sermon before we go to sleep. Every la ilaha illallah is a refusal. Every prayer is a small jihad al-Akbar. Every Friday's dua nudba is the renewal of the covenant, the soul made at Surat A'raf that we spoke about in the second session. When God asked, "Am I not your Lord?" and the soul answered, "Yes, we bear witness," the faith mingles into the flesh through the saying. The body becomes the testimony through the repeating. And someone like us, by the mercy of God, becomes the kind of believer who, when the moment comes, be it small or be it great, can answer with the sentence that has been mingled into our blood for a lifetime: La ilaha illallah, there is no God, none, none, none except God. Please give me a salawat and we continue.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
And the negation, La ilaha, clears the chamber, like we said. But the chamber, once cleared, must be inhabited. The testimony does not end at the negation. It moves to the affirmation. And the affirmation, illallah, is not the affirmation of a doctrine. It is the affirmation of a sovereignty that, once accepted in the heart, asks for everything. Tonight, on the eve of the 10th, I want to hand you the verse that names what the heart is being asked for. It is the prayer of Prophet Abraham, the same Abraham whose inheritance our beloved Imam al-Husayn carries on the day of Ashura, that we spoke about momentarily. The Quran in Surah Al-A'nam, the chapter of the cattle, 6th chapter of the Quran, verses 162 to 163, preserves what the Prophet was commanded to declare as the inheritance of Abraham. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Say, indeed my prayer, my rites of sacrifice, my living, my dying are for God, Lord of the worlds. No partner has he. And this I have been commanded, and I am the first of those who submit." Hear what kind of declaration this is. My prayer, that's the easy part. Of course my prayer is for God. The believer says, La ilaha illallah, there is no God except God, and bows in prayer, and the prayer is for God. My rites of sacrifice, nusuki, the qurban, the sacrifice I offer, the hajj I walk, the ziyarah I go to, etc., the offerings I bring. Again, also for God, also the easy part. The forms of worship are obviously for the one who set the forms out. But then the verse does something the believer must really sit with and reflect upon. It refuses to stop at the forms. It says, Mahyaya, my living. Every breath, every meal, every conversation, every minute at the desk, every step on the road, every phone scrolling that we do, every laugh, every sigh, every word said to a child, every word said to an elder, every word said to a peer, every coin counted, every choice made when no one is watching. All of it for God, Lord of the worlds. And then you have mamati, my dying. Not only the moment of my death, the whole arc of my mortality, the fact that I am a creature who will end, the whole shape of my finitude, for God, Lord of the worlds. And the verse closes, La sharika lah, no partner has he. Not even a tiny partner, not even a minute, teensy-weensy partner, not even the partner we've been training ourselves to deny in the la ilaha of the daily testimony. The whole life, the whole death, the entire orientation, without a single competing throne in any chamber of any moment. This is the Abrahamic prayer. This is what our beloved Imam Husayn inherited from his forefather Abraham and carried into the field at Karbala. When he prayed his last 2 rak'ah units in the midst of the arrows, and when he performed his last sajda saying, I am contented with your decree and I submit to your command, this is the verse the body was finally inhabiting. My prayer, my rites, my living, my dying, all of them, for God, Lord of the worlds. The whole arc of his existence had become the verse he had been carrying in his mouth, in his soul, in his heart, since the beginning. That is the witness of the heir of Abraham. And here is what Imam Ali taught us about how a believer who is not infallible reaches toward that orientation. Dua Kumail. The supplication Imam Ali taught to his companion Kumail ibn Ziyad, which the Shia generally recite on Thursday nights and have done so for 14 centuries. It preserves a sentence that is the believer's aspirational answer to the verse of Surah An'am that we quoted earlier, the prayer of Abraham. Dua Kumail says, so that my deeds and my devotional practices may all become a single, unified devotion, and my state in your service everlasting. حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. Look at what Imam Ali is saying. Look at what Imam Ali is asking for on our behalf. Every Thursday night when we recite this dua. My deeds, the mundane, everyday, the making of a cup of tea, the walking to work, the standing in the supermarket queue. My devotions, the salah, the dhikr, the recitation, the fast, the pilgrimage, etc. Imam Ali asks God to make these two things, the mundane and the sacred, into one. Wirdan wahida, a single unified devotion. The believer who is given this by God's mercy is the believer for whom the line between the everyday and the worshipful has been dissolved, whose work, whose cup of tea, whose conversation with a stranger at the bus stop, whose sleep, whose laughter, whose tears, each is a wird, a devotion. And then You have sarmada. وَحَالِي فِي خِدْمَتِكَ sarmada. Sarmada means perpetual, continuous, unceasing, like a river that does not stop. This is what Dua Kumail asks. This is what Surah An'am, the chapter of the cattle, verse number 162, declares. This is what Abraham inherited into the chain that lands at Karbala. This is what Imam Husayn carried in his prayer at noon on the 10th. And this is what someone like us, by the slow work of Jihad Akbar, the Greater Jihad, prayer by prayer, Thursday night by Thursday night, Friday morning by Friday morning, is being shaped toward. 4 practices we hold tonight, and a 5th that closes the cycle when we walk together to mark Arba'een. 5 times a day, the obligatory prayers. We say, La ilaha illallah, there is no God except God. And the testimony is mingled into our flesh and our blood. Every morning, Dua al-Ahad, we renew with God and with our awaited master, Imam al-Mahdi, may our souls be his ransom, may God hasten his return. The very first covenant the soul made at A'raf, at the one we talked about in Surah A'raf, when God asked, am I not your Lord? And we answered, yes, we bear witness. Every Thursday night with Dua Kumail, we ask, with the words of Imam Ali, that our deeds and our devotions may become one continuous orientation toward God. And every Friday in Dua Nudba, we weep. We weep for the absence of the hidden Imam and receive into our hearts the mukhalata line about faith mingling with flesh and blood. And Arba'een, Ziyarat Arba'een, which is by some narrations indicated as a sign of a believer. The dedicated visitation text on the 40th morning, when the chain of witnesses from Karbala to today reaches its annual seal. Night 15, God willing, we will sit with these supplications in full on the eve of the walking, daily, weekly, across the cycle of the year. By these, set within the broader science of self-building, akhlaq and tazkiyah, tazkiyat al-nafs, that our tradition, or cleansing the soul, self-building, that our tradition has carried across centuries, only by these does someone like us, who is not infallible, slowly become the kind of believer whose life and death are for God, Lord of the worlds, without partner, without remainder, and without compromise. This is the practical Jihad al-Akbar. This is how the inner Yazid is defeated, not in one heroic moment, but in tens or hundreds of thousands of small daily ones, repeated over decades, until the body itself has become its testimony. Until what was once words on the tongue are, by the mercy of God, substance in the bones. And the Prophet named this work a very long time ago, in the early years of the Islamic call. The very famous narration. When the Prophet welcomed back his soldiers from a military campaign, he turned to them and said, and the references are all in the write-up, we have returned from the lesser jihad to the greater jihad. His companions, surprised, asked him what the greater jihad was, and he said, the jihad, the struggle of a person against his own self. The lesser jihad, what is known as jihad al-Asghar, is the outer struggle, the defense of life, family, community, the ummah, against the aggression that comes from the outside. The greater jihad, the jihad al-Akbar, is the inner struggle, the struggle of a person against his own self, against his own nafs. And the Prophet's order is important. He does not say that the outer jihad is unimportant. He calls it asghar, lesser, smaller. And the inner he calls akbar, or greater. Why? Because the outer jihad can be performed by a person whose inner jihad has collapsed. And when that happens, the outer jihad does not bring forth what God intends to bring forth from it. It brings forth instead the very evil it was supposed to oppose. A person who fights the outer Yazid without first having fought the inner Yazid will, sooner or later, become the same version of what he was fighting against. The revolution he wins will install on the throne his enemy held, the throne his own nafs has been wanting to sit on. The Prophet knew this 14 centuries ago, before any revolution of the modern world demonstrated it. The inner jihad is the foundation. Without it, the outer cannot stand. And now we come to Imam Khomeini, the late leader of the Islamic Revolution and the founder of the Islamic Republic, may God rest his pure soul. The man whose pen broke the Pahlavi throne and whose lectures from Najaf became the spiritual foundation of a movement, wrote one of his earliest and most beloved works on this very theme, called Jihad al-Akbar, the greatest jihad, combat with the self. It's compiled from his lectures to the seminarians in Najaf in the late 1960s and 70s. In the years that he was building, in the shadow of one empire, what would become the rejection of every empire. And what did he teach the seminarians? He taught them that the political work they would carry, the work of refusing the Shah, of preparing the revolution, of building the Islamic Republic, was built upon and could not exist without the inner work. The seminarians who would carry the outer struggle of the revolution could not do so unless they had first carried the inner struggle of their own selves. And the warning he gave them, and we must hear this tonight because it is severe. Imam Khomeini said, references of course are all in the write-up, a revolution built by people who have not yet defeated their inner Yazid will, in the end, install an inner Yazid on the outer throne. And then what the revolutionaries threw out the door will return through the window. Of course, this is my reading on Imam Khomeini's framework, the structural argument of his thesis. And I've paraphrased rather than given it verbatim, as for brevity. The exact verbatim of the lecture sits in Jihad al-Akbar, and any edition that you might find online, I recommend and advise the listener, the viewer, the reader to go and find and reflect upon. The structural argument is this: the inner jihad is the precondition of the outer, and the believer who would refuse the empires of the world must first refuse the empires of the heart. And Imam Sayyed Ali Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, returned to this theme across almost 40, 50, 60 years of leadership. One statement of his, repeated in many forms before every Muharram, foundational to his annual address theme to the eulogists and the public, captures it precisely and cleanly. Hear what he said about Ashura itself, and the references again are in the write-up. Ashura is the perfect manifestation of both the jihad against the self and the inner jihad, and the jihad against the enemy. Those who stayed with Imam al-Husayn in Karbala and created the epic had, prior to facing the swords of the enemy, already conquered their own selves, their fears and their worldly attachments. They brought the Greater Jihad to its perfection, which is precisely why they were able to stand so unparalleled in the lesser jihad. Hear what this actually teaches us. The 72 who stood with our beloved Imam in Karbala, people like Habib ibn Madahir, Burayra Hamadani, Zuhair ibn Qayn, Sa'id ibn Abdullah, Muslim ibn Awsajan, all of the others, these were not men who happened by some accident of geography or some coincidence of biography to find themselves in the right place at the right time. They were men who had already won the inner jihad in the years and the decades that preceded Karbala. By the night of Ashura, the bodies they brought to the field were bodies that could not have done otherwise. The Greater Jihad had been won prayer by prayer, refusal by refusal, in the long and quiet years before anybody knew those bodies were being prepared for. And this also, of course, includes Wahab ibn al-Nasrani, the Christian. This is what makes all of these companions the lamps that would not flicker. This is the perfect manifestation of both jihads. The jihad against the self, perfected over a lifetime, and the jihad against the enemy, completed in a few hours. And every theology must at some point answer one question. Does this walk in human bodies, or is it just talk? The Hausa tradition we have just walked through, from the Prophet, through Imam Ali, through Imam Khomeini in Najaf, through Imam Khamenei in Tehran, gave us the doctrine, the architecture, the diagnostic. And then God gave us a generation of believers who lived it. The theology written in the Hausa walked in the flesh of the resistance. It was the sleepless eyes of Haj Qasim Soleimani, may God rest his pure soul, the commander of the hearts, the man whose name the Americans needed a drone strike to silence at Baghdad airport in January of 2020. It was the 25-year silence of Haj Imad Maghriya, may God rest his pure soul, who did the work without his name on it, without his image on it, until even the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus in the world could not see him, because there was no eye left to be seen. It was Sayyid Abbas al-Musawi, may God rest his pure soul, refusing the palaces of the comfortable, climbing into the pulpit instead, anchoring himself in Imam Ali's letter to his governor in Basra 14 centuries before, and refusing the leaders of his own day who had forgotten that letter. It was Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, may God rest his pure soul, winning the battle in the mihrab of the night prayer before he ever won it in the trench of Tammuz, teaching across 40 years of weekly addresses. And the victory of 2000 and 2006 had nothing to do with the abundance of weapons. And it is Shaykh Naim Qasim, may God protect him, naming the resistance itself as spiritual discipline. 5 lives, 1 architecture. The same theology Imam Khomeini wrote in Najaf and Imam Khamenei explained in Tehran. Walking in the flesh of those who carried the body, said Fatima al-Zahra, handed forward into history. And of those who walked it, hear one sentence. It was written by Haj Qasim Soleimani to his daughter Fatima in the years he was awake. And the reference is in the write-up. And this is something you should reflect on deeply. Haj Qasim wrote, "O my daughter, I am so tired. I have not slept for 30 years, but I do not wish to sleep any longer either. I sprinkle salt in my eyes so that my eyelids dare not close, lest the helpless child's head be cut off in my negligence." This is what Jihad al-Akbar looked like in the body of one of the great commanders of our age. Not asceticism for its own sake, asceticism so that the heart could be free enough to weep and the body alert enough to act when a single child, be it in Aleppo, in Mosul or anywhere else, needed someone awake on her behalf. The 72 who stood with Imam Husayn at Karbala won the inner jihad. The resistance leaders of our own age won the inner jihad in their generation. They walked the road. The theology took flesh. The future telling awaits across the Arba'in sessions, God willing. Tonight, hold on to the architecture. The theology took flesh in our own time. But every theology that walks must also reckon with its shadow. Please give me a salawat and we continue.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
And there is a shadow to this teaching, the companion to it, the one Imam Khomeini gave us, Imam Khamenei rather, gave us in his most uncomfortable lecture on Ashura, the Ibrat-hai Ashura, the warnings of Ashura, delivered to the commanders and veterans of the 27th Muhammad Rasulullah division of the Iranian military on the 10th of June 1996. The 72 won the inner jihad. That is why they could stand. But the Khawas, the elites of Kufa, the elites, the nobles, the notables, the men of position and learning, who had once written letters of allegiance to Imam al-Husayn, they lost the inner jihad. That is why they could not stand. And the diagnostic of their failure is the most uncomfortable warning Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, ever delivered about Ashura. The references in the write-up, listen. If the elites who support the truth value and love their lives, their comfort, their positions, their children and their wealth more than the preservation of truth, if in the moment of danger, in the moment of the test, in the moment of the Greater Jihad and the Lesser Jihad, they show weakness, then the event of Ashura occurs and the Husayn ibn Alis are sent to the slaughterhouse. Hear what kind of statement this is. The killing of Imam al-Husayn at Karbala was not done only by the swords of Ibn Sa'ad's army. It was also done by the slow, daily and almost invisible weakening of the people of Kufa who had once written 18,000 odd letters of allegiance to Imam al-Husayn. They had not become enemies. They had merely become tired, comfortable, valuing their wealth and positions and their children's safety a little too much, more than they valued the truth. And by the time the test came, there was nothing left in them to refuse with. The 18,000 odd letters from Kufa were written by the same people who 8 weeks later stood in Ibn Sa'ad's army or sat in the back streets in Kufa with their doors locked. The same people, not different people. The same hearts that had said yes had, without the people realizing, already lost the strength to keep saying yes when that saying of yes cost something. And Imam Ali named the diagnostic principle centuries before Imam Sayyed Ali Khamenei. Imam Ali writes, this from Najm al-Agha, you can find the reference in the write-up. The greatest sin is the one the doer considers small. The elites of Kufa did not see their love of wealth, their love of comfort, their love of position, their love of safety for their children and so on as great sins. They saw these at most as small compromises. The small concession to wealth, the small holding back from the dangerous truth, the small turning of the face from the man in the desert. But Imam Ali had already named what these were. The sin that is treated as small is the sin that does its worst work, because it is never resisted, it is never repented, and it is never carried to God. It accumulates, it hardens, it becomes the soil out of which great sin grows. And when that great moment comes, the moment of Ashura, the moment when truth needs us to refuse with our whole selves, the soil that has been built out of small compromises will simply not hold. The Husayn ibn Ali of every age are sent to the slaughterhouse not by villains, but by good people who let their small sins grow into the inability to refuse. And so, when we ask ourselves tonight what Jihad al-Akbar looks like in our own lives, the first place we look is the sin that we have been treating as small. That one, the one we have been telling ourselves doesn't matter, is the one that we must, by the criterion of our beloved Imam al-Husayn and the diagnostic of Imam Ali, that is the one we must treat as the greatest, because that is precisely what it is. Imam Ali also taught us about the station that follows. The sin that grieves us is itself a station. Imam Ali says again in Najm al-Agha, references are in the write-up, a sin that grieves you is better in the sight of God than a good deed that makes you proud. Better a broken heart by acknowledging a sin than a heart inflated by an obedience that has lost all sincerity. The first half of the criterion asks us, where is your refusal? The second half asks us, which of your sins have you been treating as small? Both questions are asked every day by the criterion of Karbala, and both must be answered honestly. The 72 stood because they had refused their inner Yazid in 1,000, tens of thousands of small, tiny daily battles. And the elite of Kufa fell because they had treated those battles as tiny. And we tonight, on the eve of Ashura, choose which side of that ledger we will spend the rest of our lives writing ourselves onto. And Imam Ali did not leave us only the diagnostic of failure. He gave us the lock that is also the way forward. In Ghurur al-Hikam, you can find the reference in the write-up. Imam Ali says, fight against your soul in obedience to God the way an enemy would fight his enemy and overpower it the way a rival would overpower his opponent. For indeed the strongest person is the one who subdues his self. Fight against your soul the way an enemy would fight his enemy. Imam Ali, the man who at the Battle of Khaybar lifted a gate single-handed, the man who soared at Badr and Uhud and Khandaq, turned the tide of the early battles of Islam. That man tells us that the strongest person is not the man who can fight his outer enemy. The strongest person is the man who can fight his inner self. And so, every day is Ashura and every land is Karbala. the Dr. Ali Shariati frame that we studied on the fourth night. Now it lands in its fullest meaning. And it is, Ashura is every day because the criterion is applied every day. And it is Karbala every land because the field of the inner jihad is wherever you are standing right now. The criterion does not retire after Muharram. The criterion was not closed when Imam al-Husayn fell. The criterion is the air that the believer breathes. And here is the structural payoff that closes tonight. If we do not control the Yazid that is inside us, if we do not refuse the Pharaoh in our nafs, if we do not turn the staff against the empire in our own heart, then what is inside us will eventually pour out. And what pours out is exactly the evil the empires perform on the outside. The empires of the world are not in the world. The empires of the world begin in the heart that refused its own jihad. The American Empire did not start in Washington. The American Empire started in every American heart that, given the option between monotheism, Tawheed, and consumption, chose consumption. The Zionist regime did not start in Tel Aviv. The Zionist regime started in the heart of any tradition that chose the tribe over the truth. The Takfiri network did not start in Raqqa. It started in every heart that chose the ease of declaring an enemy over the labor of seeing a brother. The British Empire did not start in Whitehall. It started in every English heart that, given the option between Christ and conquest, chose conquest. Every empire of the world is built out of the small choices of unconverted hearts. And the work of the criterion, the work Imam al-Husayn has been asking of us for 13.5 centuries, is the work of converting our own hearts before the empire of any age can build itself out of them. That is the criterion fully applied. That is Jihad al-Akbar. That is the work that begins tonight, after this sermon, in the chamber of every one of us. Please give me a salawat. We move on to the criterion and the pause.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Imam Husayn is the criterion for the empire out there and the empire in here. And the criterion is continuous for every day of the rest of our lives. And the work of the criterion is never only out there. It begins every morning in the chamber that Imam Ali called the trench of the self. And now, having received what we receive, we pause. We have walked 9 nights together. Tonight is the 10th. After tonight, for approximately 5 weeks, while the candle continues, the pulpit closes. The work is now in your life. Arba'een is coming. Arba'een is on the 20th day of Safar, the 40th day after Imam al-Husayn. The Master of Witnesses fell at noon on the 10th, about 5 weeks from tonight. We will gather again from the eve of the 15th of Safar to walk the last 5 nights of the road that ends at the body of our Imam on Arba'een morning. We return because the story does not end at noon on Ashura. There is a witness after the witness, and her name is Sayyid Zainab, peace and blessings be upon her. About 5 weeks from now, we will begin again at the body of our beloved Imam al-Husayn, not at noon, but at the evening, when commonly this time is known as Sham Ghariba, when the sister stands over him and refuses to leave. That is the road ahead. But there are 3 propositions to carry through the 5-week silence between Ashura and the start of Arba'een on the eve of the 15th of Safar. First, we know the criterion. We have walked 9 nights to learn how to weigh. Tonight we have learnt what we weigh against. We will not call any death Shahada that does not stand the test of Imam al-Husayn. We will not bless the word until we know it. Second, We name the empires, and we name them as systems, not as men. We will not flinch from naming what the imperial counterfeits look like in our own age. The witness against the regimes is the witness for the peoples. We honor the peoples by naming what the regimes have done in their name. We name the system that has lost its godliness. We do not collapse a system to the leader as its head. We name what an unchecked self becomes when given an empire. Third, we pledge the daily refusal. The criterion is not for the great moments. The criterion is for tonight, after this sermon, before we sleep, and tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, and every morning after that for the rest of our lives. We will say, La ilaha illallah, there is no God except God, with the full negation of every false sovereign of the heart, and the full affirmation of the one. We will fight the inner Yazid as Imam Ali taught us to fight him, as an enemy fights his enemy. We will treat no sin as small. We will weep when God's mercy lifts us to it, the sin that grieves us, and we will not be made proud by any deed that does not also humble us. 3 propositions: the criterion, the empire, and the daily refusal. By God's mercy, we will carry these for 5 weeks until the eve of the 15th of Safar, when we return for the witness after the witness with our next teacher, Said Zainab, peace and blessings be upon her. By God's mercy, the bodies that walk back into this room, into this call, into this discussion, will be a little more like the bodies that stood with Imam Husayn at Karbala, and a little less like the bodies that stayed home in Kufa. And the question we carry home with us, the question this series began with on the very first night, the question we ask tonight in the broken voice of the Imam who comes after, is the question God asked Cain on the empty field after the first Qurban: where is your brother? The question Abel's blood has been asking the earth ever since: are we still walking, brother? Or have we let the small sins grow into the inability to refuse? Or have we stayed in Kufa with the doors locked and let the Husayn of our hour go alone into the desert? Tonight we receive the criterion. The criterion is now in our hands. The walking is what comes next. And now the Maqtal opens the door we have been standing at all night. In a moment, we will hear the day of Ashura, as the Imam who comes after has carried it, from behind the veils of ghaiba, occultation, for 13.5 centuries. The morning prayer at Karbala, the address to the army, the going out of the family one by one, Muslim and Hur and Wahab and the 4 cherry blossoms of the morning, Habib and Burayr and Zuhair and Sa'id and Muslim bin Awsaja, al-Abbas, the suckling infant, every name we have wept for across 9 nights, walking out one by one until our beloved Imam stands alone in a field of his own family and companions. The cry that returned no answer, the final prayer in the midst of the arrows, the prayer that Sa'id ibn Abdullah shielded with his body, the prayer that ended in the last sajda of the religion, contented with your decree, submitting to your command. The fall, the body that folded around the infant, the trampling, and after the silence the trampling makes, the recovery. From Said Zainab, who has been the structural pivot of this series since the 8th night. Ma ra'aytu illa jamila. I saw nothing but beauty in the broken voice that will close the maqtal. Then the closing benediction in a voice that has by the time the maqtal reaches its last words, it will be a slightly different voice from the one that we have been hearing in the maqtal for the last 10 nights. Let us listen. So now we have a very short supplication and then we conclude. In your name, O God, O Lord of the martyrs, the truthful, O Lord of the worlds. Peace be upon Abel, the first witness of the earth. Peace be upon every witness in every tradition who refused to bow to other than God. Peace be upon every man and every woman who has been wronged, expelled from their home only because they said our Lord is God. O God, we have nowhere to go but your door. O God, by the inheritance of Adam, of Noah, of Abraham, of Moses, of Jesus, of our Master Muhammad that came to rest in the body of our beloved Imam al-Husayn, except tonight's sitting. Make us heirs of the heir. Make us walkers on the road. Make us prayers of the prayer the Master of Witnesses prayed at noon on the 10th. Peace be upon Adam, the chosen one of God. Peace be upon Abel, the first Qurban the earth received. And peace upon every brother whose blood since then has asked the question. Peace upon Noah, who called his people day and night, and whose ark carried the seed forward. Peace upon Abraham, the friend of God, and upon Ismail, the son spared, so that the son to come would, by God's decree, be the great sacrifice that God promised. Peace upon Moses, who spoke with God, and upon his brother Aaron. Peace upon their staff raised against the Pharaoh. Peace upon Jesus, the son of Mary, the Spirit of God, and peace upon his honourable mother, Saint Mary, the truthful one. Peace be upon David, and upon Solomon, upon Zechariah, and upon his son John the Baptist. Peace upon every prophet whose name we know, and every prophet whose name only you know. Peace be upon our Master Muhammad, the beloved of God. Peace upon his daughter, Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, the chief of the women of the worlds. Peace upon the commander of the faithful, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, who taught us in his Ghurur al-Hikam that the strongest person is the one who subdues his own self, who taught us in Nahj Balagha that the greatest sin is the one the doer considers small, who taught us on a Thursday night with Kumail ibn Ziyad in the cemetery of Kufa the supplication that we still recite, the plea for wirdan wahida, that our deeds and our devotion may all become one continual devotion. Peace upon Imam al-Hasan, the patient one. And peace upon our beloved Imam al-Husayn, the master of the witnesses. And we ask you, O God, by his blood, by his prayer in the midst of the arrows, by his last sajda, by every wound the chronicles count and every wound only you count, make us from his friends. Peace upon his sister, Sayyid Zainab, the witness after the witness, who watched what no sister should be asked to watch, and who answered the tyrant of Kufa with the line our series has carried since the 8th night, I saw nothing but beauty. Peace upon Sayyidah Fatima al-Sughra and Sayyidah Sukaina and Sayyidah Ruqayya, the daughters who walked the captive's road. Peace upon Sayyidah Rabab, the mother of the suckling infant, who would not leave the grave for a year. Peace upon Sayyidah al-Baneen, the mother of al-Abbas, who sent the 4 moons of her household and did not, when the news came, weep for her own sons until the men of the household had wept first for the beloved Imam. Peace upon Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, the son of Ali, the moon of the Banu Hashim. Peace upon Ali al-Akbar, peace upon Qasim, the son of Hassan. Peace upon Aoun and Muhammad, the sons of Sayyid Zainab, and Abdullah, the son of Ja'far al-Tayyar. Peace upon Ali al-Asghar, the suckling, the infant, whose throat the arrow found in his father's arms. Peace upon every member of the family of the Prophet who fell on the desert of Karbala. Peace upon Muslim bin Aqil, the ambassador who fell in Kufa. Peace upon Hur, who turned at the last hour. Peace upon Wahab al-Kalbi, the convert, with his mother and his wife at the tent. Peace upon Habib ibn Madahir, the elder, who laughed in the morning of Ashura. Peace upon Burair al-Hamadani, the doyen of the reciters. Peace upon Zuhair ibn Qayn, who turned at Zubala. Peace upon Sa'id ibn Abdullah, whose body took the arrows for the prayer. Peace upon Muslim ibn Awsaja, the resolute. Peace upon every name the chronicles preserve, and every name only you preserve. Peace upon the Imams of guidance, Imam Sajjad and Imam Baqir, Imam al-Sadiq and Imam al-Kadhim, Imam al-Ridha and Imam al-Jawad, Imam Hadi and Imam al-Askari, until the chain reaches the Imam of our age. May our souls be his ransom. May you, O our Lord, hasten his return. Peace upon Sayyid Abbas al-Musawi, who taught us the condition for God's guardianship and the lesson of Imam al-Husayn. Peace upon his wife, Sayyidah Siham, and upon their 5-year-old son, Sayyid Husayn, who were martyred with him on the 16th of February 1992 in the south of Lebanon. Peace upon Sheikh Raghib Harb. Peace upon Haj Qasim Sulaymani, the lover of Ishq, the seeker of Ma'rifat, the Shaheed whose blood the Americans spilled at Baghdad airport on the 3rd of January 2020. By your mercy, raise him with our beloved Imam al-Husayn. By your mercy, make us of those who learnt from him. Peace upon Haj Imad Mughniya, the architect of the Islamic resistance, martyred in Damascus in February of 2008. Peace upon Haj Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, martyred on the same night as Haj Qasim, at the same airport in the same car by the same hand. Peace upon Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the Sayyid of the resistance, martyred on the 27th of September 2024 by the same regime that has stolen the name of the Jewish people to commit what it commits. Peace upon Imam al-Khamenei, who taught us in his Jihad al-Akbar that the inner struggle is the foundation of the outer, and who in his Islamic government taught us no east and no west. Peace upon Imam Sayyed Ali Khamenei, who carried the lamp forward for years, and who in his final address 11 days before they killed him in February of this year said exactly what our beloved Imam al-Husayn said in Medina: someone like me does not give allegiance to someone like him. O God, we pray to you for Imam Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei, the new Wali al-Faqih, the son who has taken his father's place at the head of the worship. Preserve him for us, O God, strengthen him, guide him, protect him. Make him the leader he has been trained to be and the leader that you have appointed him to be, until the Imam of our age returns and the line he carries is handed back to its rightful holder. Peace upon the children of Minab, the young men of the resistance, every Palestinian, Lebanese, Iraqi, Iranian, Yemeni, Syrian, Bahraini fighter who took his father's place and his grandfather's burden in his hands. Peace upon the medics in Gaza who stayed when everyone else left. Peace upon the Sunni families of Bukamal who wrote to Haj Qasim after the liberation operation. Peace upon every defender of the shrines. Peace upon the children of Gaza, every single one of them. The children the empire has killed for 2.5 years now in front of our eyes. Peace upon the women of Gaza. Peace upon the women of Lebanon. Peace upon the mothers, the orphans and the displaced. Peace upon every wronged person in every land. The Yemeni mother, the Iraqi father, the Bahraini sister, the Kashmiri grandmother, the Rohingya child, the Lebanese sister. Anyone who has been wronged because they said our Lord is God. O God, hasten the return of the Imam of our age. Make us from his helpers. Make us from his soldiers. Make us of those who, when he calls, are already standing. And let us, O God, before we leave this room, and before this sermon turns into the maqtal, recite the 3 verses we recite at the close of every gathering. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Indeed, we belong to God and to him we return. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. And the wrongdoers will soon know at what goal they will end up. حَسْبُنَ اللَّهُ وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ. God is sufficient for us and he is the best of guardians. And our final pledge tonight: O God, we will return by your mercy on the eve of the 15th of Safar, 15 nights before Arba'een, 5 nights before Arba'een, 40 days from this morning we return to the body of your master of witnesses, to the sister who survived him, to the road that does not end at noon on Ashura. We will return. Amen. Amen, O Lord, sustainer of the universes. Amen, O most merciful of the merciful. Wa akhiru da'wani an alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.